What's up, guys? My name is Aaron, and welcome to UX Crypto. And today we have a special guest from the coin, Devve. And yeah, it's an absolutely great project. I'll just quickly show you a tiny bit.
Introducing the DevX blockchain and its platform token, Devve. Together, they will strengthen global societies and economies by strengthening the world itself. DevX is unlike any Layer 1 blockchain before it, as it utilizes a unique sharding architecture that enables any company or project to spin up its own blockchain, exclusively customized for their application and needs. DevX also offers a restful API, which means all of the world's developers are already blockchain developers. The DevX architecture can process millions of transactions per second and is orders of magnitude less expensive than other blockchains. While DevX will transform the way the world's assets are held, the DeFi Token will transform the world itself. Devve's utility is to become the world's source of truth for environmental and societal data. DevX and Devve, next-generation technologies designed to protect the next generation.
So, Tom, do you want to tell us a bit more about your project? I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, great. Thank you for having me on your show, Aaron. So Devve is the cryptocurrency for the DevX blockchain. I'm not directly involved with Devve myself. I'm involved with the blockchain and the kind of the original creation of the overall project. And then we're a US-based company, and so we spun out the management of Devve to a Swiss nonprofit called the Forever Association. So the overall concept of the DevX blockchain is probably a good place to start. It started about 8 years ago, and I followed Bitcoin since kind of the early 2000s. 2010, so about 2011-ish. Actually, in the mid 2000s, I had a website that had a digital currency even before blockchain. So it's always been a space that I've been interested in, but I didn't really look into building a real business in the space until about 2016 or so, end of 2015. And the first thing I did is I read the Bitcoin white paper and got my arms around how it works, understood how proof of work works, understood how they adjust the difficulty on figuring out what the nonce is for solving the proof of work equations. It's a brilliant algorithm. And the thing I particularly liked about the Bitcoin white paper was the idea that you could have a system where any two parties can transact without using a central authority or an intermediary. They could both independently audit a transaction. Anybody could independently audit the entire chain. Like, it's brilliant concepts. And then proof of work, is a pretty brilliant algorithm as well, but it has trade-offs. And so when I started first looking at building a blockchain technology, I come from a traditional business background. So my first company was a robotics business. In that business, I raised about $34 million. I took the company public. We created the world's first consumer 3D touch device. Got it down to a consumer price point. Started at tens of thousands of dollars. Got it down to where it was about $150 FOB US. And with that, got into the video game industry. So a lot of my career was actually in the video game space. And in that company, I raised about, as I said, $34 million, licensed about $100 million of video game development, got full source access to big game franchises: Tiger Woods Golf, Madden Football, NBA Live, Need for Speed, Mass Effect, Battlefield Series, Half-Life 2, Left 4 Dead, Team Fortress. So a lot of these kind of big games, we had full source access to them. And then, to make a long story short, sold our IP to Facebook. And so that was my first business. So coming into the blockchain side of things, again, I was a more traditional businessman, hadn't really been involved in the crypto space, loved the Bitcoin algorithms and concepts, but really kind of felt if you want to build a real business in the blockchain space, you have to solve all the problems that real businesses need to have solved. And there are big challenges in scalability, privacy, fraud, theft, and loss, stability. One of the biggest is cost. Another of the biggest is interoperability. And so we designed our own blockchain protocol from scratch, came up with our own consensus mechanism, and then from there solved the sharding problem. And so, so there's lots of sharding solutions out there. Ethereum has their own sharding work, for example. But our sharding approach is very different from anything else in the blockchain space. The way ours works is you have any number of independent blockchains or shards, each application can run their own shard, run their own application. So rather than having all of your different applications running on one mainnet, what we do is we spin up different blockchains, different shards. And the thing that's really powerful about that is, number one, it lets you scale. And so we can process, tens of millions of transactions per second, really, ultimately, and our cross shard mechanism, we benchmarked at 8 million transactions per second. So transactions that go between shards, we can process those at 8 million transactions per second. And so it's the fastest blockchain infrastructure in the world. But almost equally important, or maybe arguably more important, is it gives you architectural flexibility. So the fact that anybody that comes to us that wants to build a blockchain application, we can customize the shard for their use case. And especially if you're looking at, enterprise applications, or, a global 2000 company wants to build a real world business application. If you're talking with companies at that size, you have to work with their IT departments, and you have to work with their CIO, and you have to work with kind of the constraints and requirements that, big enterprise businesses need. So we can do that. We can create a shard customized for their applications, work with their IT department, get it all integrated, work with their privacy concerns, their governance concerns. So overall, it's a very flexible, architecturally, dynamic system. It's very cost effective as well. We're 1/10 millionth the cost of Ethereum. It's also very energy efficient. We're 1/3 billionth the energy usage of Bitcoin. We're the only ISO certified green blockchain. So it's really kind of a neat technology, underlying it, and really all was established to, build real world business applications in the blockchain space.
Wow. Yeah, really amazing stuff you're saying there, actually. Yeah, literally. Yeah, it sounds really, really good, actually, and very promising indeed. So
Thank you.
brings me into my next question. So yeah, why enter the Web3 world from Web2? From I understand
Yeah.
of what you said from history. So yeah, what
Yeah,
brought you there?
so I'm a big believer in blockchain. Like I said, I love the premises that the Bitcoin white paper had originally, and the idea that you have systems that can be trusted, that there's no central authority overseeing transactions, the idea that data is auditable and transparent and immutable. There's a lot of applications in the world that really need that type of utility, and so one of the big categories that we're focused on is the ESG space, environmental, social, and governance, right? And there's lots of greenwashing in the space. There's lots of carbon credits that have been shown to be not real, and kind of made up based on invalid data. And so the idea of making a transparent, auditable system where you maintain all of the world's environmental data that anybody can audit, and anybody can then value carbon credits based on this auditable data, I think that's huge. I think it can solve, a lot of society's problems. Another of the big categories that I'm personally really excited about is just the idea that people can control their own value. There's so many middlemen in the traditional business world that take up all of the value. Like, it's sending remittance, across country borders. There's such high fees on that, and it's ridiculous, right? So and in general, the idea that blockchain can let people control their own value, but also have the resources they need to fulfill their potential. So I'm a big believer in both the long-term vision of what blockchain can do for society, but also, shorter term applications like ESG, where you solve real problems in enormous markets. I mean, the ESG space has tens of trillions of dollars in assets under management. It's much bigger than the entirety of the blockchain space. So if you start applying blockchain applications to categories that big, that's where I think blockchain is going to grow the most over the next decade.
Definitely. So on that point, actually, I'd love to ask a question. So with obviously trying to integrate it into Web2 companies or Web3 companies, what's the plan there? As in, are you going to try and get into your technology into these different companies because of
Yeah.
white labeling in a way?
Yeah, one of the I think strongest aspects of our overall approach was, again, we were building it for real world business use. And so, a real world business, again, take a Fortune 200, Fortune 2000 company, a global 2000 company. They aren't going to hire a bunch of Solidity developers and then
Mm.
maintain, their controlled proprietary data, again, working with their CIO and their IT department on a blockchain that's run through proof of work or proof of stake, that kind of thing. Like, they just won't do it. They're not going to take mission critical data and run it in that way. And so we designed our system, and this is the part that I think we've done, particularly well, to work with traditional business systems. And so, there's
Mm.
200,000 Solidity developers in the world. There's 25 million web developers, right? And so we
Yeah.
built our whole blockchain around just a RESTful API, just HTTP post commands. So any of the world's existing web developers are already are already blockchain developers when they're using our system. So it's easy to integrate with. Actually, a good example of that, we built our own wallet application, was a web app.
Mm.
So if you go to glassblock.io, you can click on the wallet app, and actually the Glassblock marketplace itself. Both of those applications were built by a Web2 team. Actually, the leader of that team built the Amazon Kindle marketplace, reporting to Jeff Bezos, right? And so we hired him and brought him in and had him build our marketplace and build our Web2 wallet. And all of that was built by somebody who didn't have any Web3 experience, and all of his team had no Web3 experience. They all just had Web2 experience. They knew how to use the RESTful API, and they built these, amazing web apps,
Mm.
doing the thing they knew how to do, but tied into the blockchain at a core level that's driving the wallet, just using that RESTful API interface. So it's a good example. Like, just anybody can build on our blockchain, and that's really important when you want to start working with traditional businesses.
Definitely, yeah. Like, so as a UX designer, and I'm a bit technical sometimes, I have used APIs, and you're right.
Right.
Like, it's a lot easier actually to do it
Yeah,
that way.
totally.
So yeah, I definitely agree with that actually. This also brings me into, like, I suppose, the technology side as well. So just to interject quickly, if you're enjoying this interview with Devve, then you should definitely check out the cheat sheet and see where this ranks inside of my cheat sheet. So this is actually the cheat sheet, and as you can see, Devve is inside of here. And yes, I have a whole bunch of coins. I've got nearly towards 160 different coins. And obviously, if you're enjoying Devve, you want to see where it ranks inside of the cheat sheet, right? If you want to see if Devve gets inside of here, then you should check it out. And yet you can see all the different categories that you can actually see. This is a master plan to be able to get a great portfolio inside of crypto. So if you're interested in that, then I'll see you at the top together, and just go to business class right here, and you can get yourself a lovely membership. And yeah, you have access to the Moneyball cheat sheet, the full strategy breakdown, access to all the targets, yeah, the to be reviewed list. So this is all the coins that I am looking at. I've got a bunch of them in there, and this is before they actually go into the list, so you can get in before everybody else, even me. And yes, a private VIP Discord with a great community inside of there, finding loads of gems. And yeah, this coin Devve was actually suggested to me from one of my Patreons, so shout out to him. He knows who he is. Great guy. And yes, I have buy signals. So when I'm buying, I'm letting you know. It's up to you if you want to follow along. Up to you. Yeah, track my portfolio so you can see what I'm holding. And yeah, if you want to join without Patreon, then you can always email me here and just get a lifetime access. So yes, lots and lots that you can get out of this. Let's get straight back into the Devve interview. Let's do it. This question here, so proof of validators, which I'm pretty aware that your tech stack is built on. And then, yeah, why did you not go down the road of proof of stake or proof of work? So why proof of validators? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So if you kind of go back to that original story I was describing, where I read
Yeah.
about the Bitcoin white paper, right, and I was looking at what I thought was particularly compelling, the idea that anybody can independently audit the system, any two parties can independently audit a transaction between them. That's world changing stuff. Anybody that kind of says that blockchain doesn't have innate value doesn't really understand the double spend problem. The idea that you
Yeah.
can digitally solve the double spend problem, make it where you can have a digital representation of assets that people can trust, is a huge technological leap, right? And so the category, the blockchain category, is a massive, category. But
Mm.
the thing that I started looking at, though, is by the time I was looking at it, proof of work was already using, levels of energy that entire countries use, right?
Yeah.
And it wasn't designed to scale to the level that it's scaled. So again, it's a brilliant algorithm, but it has that energy problem. And it really is a real problem. Like there's, Bitcoin maximalists that, kind of deny it. But, again, if Bitcoin becomes what they hope it could be and it is 100 times more valuable, you're gonna have 100 times more energy usage. Like it's just not, it wasn't designed for the scale it's at. And then also wasn't designed for the speed and throughput and cost effectiveness and integration, So it's a brilliant concept, but it's a phase one type of concept that really showed the world what blockchain can do. But
Mm,
if you're going to start deploying it in larger scale, you have to design things the way that real businesses work. So again, the way we designed our governance was shard based as well, right? So we use proof of validation, which is not like proof of stake. It's more like proof of authority, if you've heard of that. Proof of stake, I'll get on a little bit of a soapbox. It's one of the worst things the blockchain space has invented. Like to me, it's the epitome of why the whole blockchain space was created. Proof of stake is basically the people that own the token control it. And so
mm,
it's historically throughout history, everything, the rich get richer, the powerful get more powerful. I think
mm,
it's like, I would almost go so far as to say evil. Like it's proof of stake is a very bad algorithm. It's not,
mm,
it's not what the crypto space was designed for. Proof of work, is an algorithm that is amazing, but wasn't designed for scale. So what we did is we basically said any given application is going to have its own governance needs. And sometimes you want decentralized governance, which is different than decentralized operations, right? You have
mm,
decentralized operations to make things Byzantine fault tolerant, where if certain nodes are corrupted that are running the system, the overall system still runs. Then you have
mm,
decentralized governance, which is where, and a lot of people in the crypto space don't distinguish this, but it's important to distinguish decentralized governance, where anybody can come in and run the system. So having a system that anybody can come in and run it
mm,
is a cool concept, but it's an incredibly hard design criteria, right? And so when I was designing, the DevX blockchain, I kind of said that's not the heart of what we need. The heart of what we need is transparency, auditability, immutability, those types of things. A little
mm,
bit, who cares how the blocks get added to the blockchain as long as they're transparent and auditable, right? And so we designed our system where each shard can have its own governance. Each application can design what governance it needs. A lot of the crypto space has kind of gone this way too. Like if you look at Axie Infinity, which
mm,
was a huge thing 3 years ago, it was it was at the beginnings of where you had kind of a permission system sitting on top of a permissionless system, and it was one of the first big examples to me of where a permission system worked, and nobody cared that it was permission because it worked, right? And
yeah,
so that's similar to what we're doing, is saying when you need decentralized governance, you could build that into one of our shards. But most real world business applications don't need that. And if you're going to, again, be working in where the blockchain space is going to be growing, particularly as it grows up and stops being the Wild West and starts moving into more and more regulatory compliance, having a system where you can control governance and operate each application's blockchain as needed is going to be critical to the blockchain space as it grows up.
definitely. I totally agree. Like as a UX person, I'm all about like the front end, as in like obviously a lot of the back end side of things. Like someone just wants it to work, right? They're not going to
Right,
know like all of these different things, but being able to have the capabilities that you could actually do different things, and even if the normal layman doesn't know they exist,
right.
but they shouldn't really even have to know, right? They should literally
Yeah,
just be able
right.
to use something straight
Like
away.
a
And
SQL database, right? People use it
yes,
all the
yeah,
time. Nobody knows they're using it. A little bit, who cares how it works, right? I love that you're a
100%.
UX designer too. Like I think of myself in most of my career as being a human computer interface designer as well. So
Yeah, that's good
so
to think of.
designing good UX is much harder than people, kind of
Oh yeah,
realize, That's why Apple is
100%.
so huge, right? Because they nailed that, right? So
Yeah, I think the thing is, like, when people get creative, right, they put themselves in like, oh, I would do this, I would do that. But what the actual fact is not what I think; it's what the general user thinks. It's more about
right.
listening. So
Yep.
the same with like
Listening
building
is
a
it,
system.
right?
Yeah, exactly. You have to kind of take the
No,
ego out and then
no
listen.
user interface designer has ever not experienced where you get like, oh, this is great, everyone's gonna love it, and then people start
Yeah,
using it. And it's like, that's not how you're supposed to do it. Don't push the buttons that way, right? Like it always,
yeah,
people always do it different than you think, and over years, you make fewer of those kinds of mistakes, as
mm,
you kind of enhance your user interface design, experience. But it still is always that way. Like you have to be humble user interface design is very humbling.
Yeah, 100%. I totally agree. Yeah, when I first
Yeah.
got into it, it was like, oh, I think this, I think that. Like, it doesn't mean
Right.
anything. Like, you can have
Yep.
assumptions, but you just have to validate the assumption. So it's more about doing that. But yeah,
Yeah,
definitely
totally.
nice. So obviously you've mentioned a little bit about like you could say the proof of work versus proof of stake validators, but this brings me to the next one: is where does Devve sit in the blockchain trilemma? Which obviously loads of people in the crypto space definitely care about this. So it'd be great to hear your opinion on it.
Yeah. So by trilemma, you mean it can be inexpensive, it can scale, and it can be decentralized. That's
Yes.
the
Yeah.
trilemma, right? Yeah. So
Mhm.
that's kind of what I was describing. So
Yeah.
in general, I would argue that there's been too much emphasis on decentralized governance, right? I think it's not needed in most applications. I think if you have a blockchain that's transparent and auditable, and you can see your assets on the blockchain, you know they're yours. There's no central authority, overseeing that ownership. It's all just mathematically defined. Then you have most of what you need. And so I do think that there's places where decentralized governance, makes sense. But I also think that's going to be less and less true because, you know, like the interfaces into systems then become managed by governments, right? So you see a lot of privacy coins, being removed off of exchanges, right? So
Yeah.
this idea of decentralized governance to me is it's not the main thing. It's not the main thing that blockchain brings to the world. The idea that people control their value, there's no middlemen, that people can get access to the resource to fulfill their potential, those types of things happen without decentralized governance. And the idea that you can maintain data that can be trusted in the ESG space, for example, that happens perfectly fine without decentralized governance. So we created, a system where each shard has its own governance, has its own validators. Usually someone comes in and says, we want to run an application for these purposes, and then we can create those validators in that way. And it's centralized in terms of the governance. That said, I do think there's going to be places where our approach actually has a form of decentralized governance, and I think it's going to happen in the ESG space. So again, that's the power of our approach. If decentral, so we solve the trilemma by engineering a system where things are coordinated, and the cost and speed are innate in our system the way it's run. So then you say, well, how are you infringing on decentralization? But the approach I think we could take with our approach longer term, and an example of where we would have decentralized governance is in the overall ESG space. So I envision one of our visions for what we want to do is create the world's source of truth for ESG data, environmental data. That it's all transparent and auditable. What I'd like to see ultimately is that all of the world's biggest institutions, all of the world's biggest research universities, all the world's countries, all contribute to governing that system. So that would be, I guess, a form of decentralized governance, but it would be permissioned on who can come in and be a validator. So proof of work makes it where you can have anybody come in without any type of permissioning. But if you have lots of different groups who are permissioned based on characteristics, then again, I argue you get what you need for that application. So.
Yeah, no, I know what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of great things you raised there as well. So the whole decentralization. So you could even argue that Bitcoin might be less decentralized now with this whole ETF thing, right? So
Yeah.
who's going to be controlling it? And it's kind of like, don't want to get political, but in the UK, it's like Brexit. I don't know if you've heard about this, right? But like, you've opened it up to the general masses, but then are they the general public the right people to make the decision? Do they have enough
Brexit was
information?
horrible.
Yeah, right. So it's
Yeah.
it can go another way, can't it? Just being too centralized in a way.
I mean, just
Like,
from a businessman's perspective, it's like so much of just great applications and financial utility was driven, before Brexit, by the UK system. And so Brexit, I think really weakened, a lot
yeah,
of the UK's financial, dominance over the world, and so anyways, that's a longer
yeah,
story. But yeah, But similarly, I think, there's stories that have been coming up about how Ethereum isn't really decentralized, and you see it how it's operated and managed. It's driven by a core group, and then the ownership in any type of proof of stake system. Again, this is why I'm such a pessimist about proof of stake. Is you know especially when you have kind of governmental level resources, they can come in and own enough of the ecosystem to
Mm,
have undue control over it. Versus, again, what I just described in our system, where compare what people think of with proof of stake based systems with a system where all of the world's countries and all of the world's biggest businesses all contribute to what ultimately is just a mathematical representation of how blocks are added. So nobody can cheat. It's just everybody's
mm,
keeping the same copies of the data. And then those same copies of the data innately are mutable. Many different entities have the entire copy of the data. Again, you have what you need for that application where nobody can come in and change things, right? It's
mm.
mathematically driven, of how blocks are added, how the data is added. Anybody can access the data. You don't need decentralized governance like a proof of work type system for that type of application. So we overall, I mean, that's the place that we're different from everything else in the blockchain space. We set up our system to be practical for real world business applications. And so any given shard is designed how it needs to be designed. And actually, another good example of that, is regulatory compliance. Like, we could have 1,000 different shards for one application in 1,000 different regulatory environments, where each shard is customized for the regulatory requirements, right? And so imagine like a massive, one of the things that we're looking to do in partnership with the Forever Association is a non-custodial exchange. Our blockchain, works at such high speed and such high throughput, where you can have non-custodial transactions where there's no middleman. Like, what
Mm,
FTX took all of their ownership of the Bitcoin that everybody gave them. It was their Bitcoin, but FTX was
mm,
controlling it, and they used it how they wanted to. Right now, Sam Bankman-Fried's in jail. Our exchange, in contrast, has atomic transactions where the assets never go to a middleman. They directly change hands on the same block, which for a blockchain is instantaneous, right?
mm,
So there's no ownership, no third party ownership of assets. It's
mm,
and so that type of application is one that will be very regulated over time. So you could have many different shards running our exchange, the Dev exchange, in many different regulatory environments, where each shard and therefore each exchange is customized to the regulatory requirements of that legal jurisdiction. And so, again, the other blockchains can't do that, right? And so that's where I feel like, again, when you look at most of the growth in the blockchain space is going to be over the next decade, our system is very well suited for the kind of upcoming challenges and where things are going to be growing. So
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah. So I suppose one question I have is a little bit is, you probably know more than me though, as in terms of decentralization, though, right? Or in terms of security, like you said, you mentioned the whole FTX side of things, and it kind of going down to one centralized point, right? Being you know who.
right.
So like, how do you, yeah, envision that? Obviously, I think decentralized in a way, you're right. It's not as relevant for business solutions, but then is it a thing where we need to consider it for security reasons, right? Because obviously we've
Yeah.
seen what's happened in the space. As
Yeah,
in, where
no,
do
that's
you?
a great question. So that's what I was distinguishing: decentralized operations versus decentralized governance. So our system is a blockchain that's run by multiple validators.
Mm,
And so what the way our system works is, one validator proposes a block. All the other validators say, all right, is this block valid? Like, is
mm,
everything signed properly? And we use public-private key pairs, actually ECDSA, so the same as Bitcoin. So are all the transactions signed? Do all the transactions make sense? Like, somebody's trying to transfer assets that they actually have. And so all the other validators look at the proposed block and then send a signed message to the proposer that says, yes, this block is valid. So they've all validated it, and then the proposer then takes all those validation messages and includes them in the block. So you have proof of validation, right? And then
okay.
and then there's kind of a round robin, type of system where different validators take turns proposing different blocks. And so what you have then is a Byzantine fault tolerant system where if one or several of the validators, are attacked by a denial of service attack, or if they're hacked, they won't be able to affect the system, right? If you get a validator that's hacked, then they propose a block that's invalid, then the other validators won't give validation messages, and then they won't be able to include those validation messages. So
Okay.
so decentralized operations is important. And again, we can do that on a per shard basis. So we could have, if you have a shard where you're running, for example, defense industry applications, and security is of utmost importance, but you can afford to pay for that security, but you can kind of turn a knob on cost versus how many validators you have, and therefore the level of security. Another application might be just a game two dudes are throwing together, and they don't need 10,000 validators on the network, right? That kind of thing. So you develop each shard as is needed for the application in terms of cost, throughput, security, all that. But we can turn those knobs up as needed for different applications.
Can you do it after build? Like, so for example, a game, for example, you've started off when you've only got like 1,000 users, and then you're like, oh my God, now I've got 1 million. Like, is it possible to do like mid doing it?
Absolutely. Right. So you start a game, it ends up being a wild success. Like, I don't know if you saw Dwarf Fortress, that was such a great game success story, right? And Minecraft is another of those big game, success stories, right? So Notch originally kind of just made it, and he quit his job and then just built it, and then the rest is history. Microsoft bought it, so he made $1 gazillion. But it was just a guy making it, right? So if you have a game that really starts to take off, you can increase the abilities of the capabilities of the shard. You can add more validators, and then you can add more shards over time. And that's how we scale. Like, if something really starts to take off, if one shard can handle 1,000 transactions per second, and the game gets so big that it needs 2,000 transactions per second, and to put that in scale, Visa handles like 24,000 transactions per second, right? So even one shard is a pretty big application. But if you do need more than what one shard can create, then you can add more and more shards, and then in general, it should be intuitive that you can scale as big as you'd ever need, because each shard is independent, has its own validators, with one exception. What happens if a transaction needs to go from one shard to another shard? So that's the big invention we had. So proof of validation, that's not particularly innovative, but our sharding solution, that's the heart of the innovation that we created. And so what we did is we created a cross shard mechanism where if a transaction needs to go from one shard to another, it transfers down through the cross shard mechanism that goes through its own proof of validation process. So it's still Byzantine fault tolerant, and it's decentralized in its operations. And then the settlement side of that transaction then is picked up by the receiver's shard. So if your shard were to send some type of game token to somebody that had their wallet in a separate shard, it would first go through consensus on your shard. The entire block would be an input into the cross shard mechanism. Then the settlement side would be picked up by the recipient shard, and then as soon as that happened, then the recipient would have access to the items. So one of the misconceptions with our overall sharding approach is that it's like a hub and spoke system or something like that, or that these are that the various shards are side chains. They're not. It's not a hub and spoke system. It's not side chains. The cross shard mechanism is simply a cross shard mechanism. It's not a master copy of the blockchain. And the master copies are the shards themselves, what we call T2 shards. The cross shard mechanism we call the T1 shard, and the T2 shards are the master copies of the blockchain for each given application. So I don't know, maybe I'm getting too deep into it, but that's
I've briefly know what you're talking about because I looked at your white paper. So I've briefly I'm just visualizing the diagram in your white paper.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there's a diagram in the Devve white paper that takes people through it if they're more interested in kind of really understanding how it works. So the T1 network concept is a cool concept. Again, I don't know anybody else in the blockchain space that's doing it. And then we had that running 5 years ago. So what we've really been doing since then And this is, again, the hard part of any business, is really then productizing, hardening it, turning it into something that's actually going to be used. In
Yeah.
particular, over the last year, we've really hardened and productized the database that sits on top of the blockchain. And so we're at a point now where we really, for the first time after 7-8 years of work, where we could start deploying the blockchain at scale across many applications. And so we're at a point now where, with almost a push of a button, we spin up a new shard, and then that shard can do the things that you need in a SaaS business. Guarantee 99.99% uptime. Guarantee scalability, guarantee costs. The stuff that SaaS customers need that you don't typically look for historically in the blockchain space, but which you are going to start using more and more as the blockchain space grows up and starts being used by real companies. So.
No, that sounds really, really good. So obviously on that note, what you said about being used by real world companies, why use RESTful API?
Yeah, so it's because that's the easiest way to get them to integrate, right? And so again, if you don't have a system that can work with a big company's IT department requirements, it's a non-starter. They're not going to use it. If you don't have a system that can manage the privacy requirements that a big company needs, that's also a non-starter. It's not going to work. So we can spin up a shard that works with their privacy requirements, works with their scalability requirements, works with their data usage requirements, and interface requirements, security requirements, all of those things. But then the last bit of it is, again, these big companies, it's a tough sell to get them to use new technology in general. They're conservative, and if you on top of, all right, I've checked off all these check boxes, I've solved the problems you need to solve, and I've spoken with CIOs of big companies, and they're like, great, this is the first blockchain I've seen that we could actually integrate our stuff into. But then if you then say, all right, now you got to go hire a bunch of Solidity developers, that you don't have experience with, and Solidity developers are, not the type of developer that you typically would find in an enterprise, right? And so an enterprise, and again, I consider myself kind of a cypherpunk at heart. I love the concepts of Bitcoin. I love the concept that Bitcoin does have decentralized governance. Like I intellectually love the algorithm, that kind of thing. But enterprises hire kind of traditional web developers with traditional processes that do traditional things. And so if you want them to work on it, you have to hand it to them in a way that they're going to actually use it, right? So that's why we created RESTful API. And that was a design decision we made 7 years ago. And it's ended up more and more over time being a great design decision.
Definitely, I'm totally with you with that. Like, so obviously as a UX designer, I work with quite big clients, and one of the hardest thing is to get them to understand new technology. And for example, even apps, right? Like, so I've done a lot of apps in my time, but there's a lot of them still stuck on just websites, and you're like, what, at this point, like, really? But
right.
even now, right? So to get like a big bank, for example, or a big insurance company to try and use the blockchain, it's like, it takes a lot of convincing, and I've done a lot of pitching in my time to try and get them to do it, but I'm just very fearful of new technology for some reason. So yes,
they're conservative and slow to move. So you gotta put everything packaged up with a bow exactly how they want to see it, right? And that's tough to do with blockchains, but that's where the flexibility of our sharding approach really is applicable to what we're targeting, which is growth in the traditional business world utilizing blockchain. So.
Definitely. No, I totally agree with you with that one. And I really like this point, by the way. When I read this one, I was excited about it. So it's really cool.
Great. Thanks.
So this one is a bit more about competitors. So how do competitors such as Energy Web Token, Power Ledger compare in the environmental space? Obviously, I know that you're not just environmental coin, but how do you compare to these competitors?
Yeah. So I think again, the place that we're different from anybody else in the blockchain space is our technological architecture. And so ESG is another space that, the sharding approach with respect to regulatory flexibility is very powerful. So you could have 1,000 shards in 1,000 different regulatory jurisdictions, or each shard is designed to maintain the data and assets needed for that country or geography or regulatory, regulatory area. And so the idea that you spin up the shards and you maintain data in the way that's needed for any given, not just application, but applications, category and regulatory environment, that's things that we can do that other blockchains can't. And that's what's needed to tackle a problem, again, that has tens of trillions of dollars in assets under management. It's not a small problem. The world's biggest companies are interacting with these assets. Having the auditability and transparency gives a huge competitive advantage. The other big difference, between us and other ESG projects is a lot of the ESG projects in the blockchain space are more like, oh, I'm going to sell a token, I'm going to buy some, carbon credits, and then I'm going to resell them later. We're not doing that. We're building technology and infrastructure and investments in the ESG space that actually creates carbon credits, and does it in a way where there's transparency and auditability that shows those carbon credits are of high value. And that's going to become one of the most valuable and sought after assets over the next decade as well, is high quality ESG assets like carbon credits. And so for example, so again, I'm not directly involved on the token side anymore, because we put together a partnership with a Swiss foundation, and the Swiss foundation, the Forever Association, is actually managing the token. But what the Forever Association doing is, for example, is investing into ESG projects. So the Forever Association, for example, they've already invested into a company that makes a material that can seal oil and gas wells to prevent methane from escaping into the atmosphere, right? And so that company originally wanted to be a materials company and just sell the material. And so when the head of the Forever Association, Ray, spoke with that company and said, hey, there's a bigger opportunity here. If you're a materials company, you're very far down the food chain. On the other hand, if you describe and design yourself as an ESG company, and you use your technological capabilities to give yourself that value, you as a company will get much more of the value in the value chain. And so what they do then is, rather than just selling their materials to somebody else who might get the ESG credits, they are building in where they can get the ESG credits through partnerships. And so overall, then what you have is the Forever Association, which is managing Devve, will use funds to invest into these ESG projects. All of the data from preventing methane from entering the atmosphere, because a well is capped with a better material, that all gets tracked on the DevX blockchain in an auditable way, so that anybody can say, like, oh, these are valid. Like, here's the data behind it. Here's what happened. They can research it. They can do due diligence on it. They can verify it, make sure there's no greenwashing. And then the carbon credits that come out of that are the type of carbon credits that the BlackRocks of the world want to see, and that all of the operating companies, Apple, Microsoft, Google, all these companies that have carbon neutral goals, need to buy to show that they actually are meeting their carbon neutral goals, because the carbon credits they're buying are real. And there's a lot of skepticism in the ESG space in general, and for good reason, because a lot of it has been BS. But if you follow how this works, you have an investment that goes into a company that's making real technology that actually literally does prevent methane from going to the atmosphere, creates valid carbon credits that companies like Apple, would buy, or any of BlackRock's holdings would buy, any of those companies. And then those companies buy those assets, which funds those types of projects, right? That project then gets revenue, and then the Devve sales also can then fund other projects like that as well. So you end up with this this system that's what people really want the ESG activities to be, where companies are spending money that's real. It's not just like a lot of what happens now, where the greenwashing is, people say, like, I'm not going to cut down these trees in this forest, and you get carbon credits for it. And it's like, you're not cutting them down. Like, that's versus a material that prevents methane from entering the atmosphere. Those are two completely different things. So we're focused on technology based solutions rather than nature based solutions, what's called. world. And then all of the data, again, being transparent, creates those higher value tokens that get purchased, that leads to more of those types of investments, and you end up with this virtuous, cycle and virtuous spiral. So that's a good example of kind of where the token fits into the ecosystem, and what the Forever Foundation is, Forever Association is trying to do with the Devve token.
Okay, that sounds really cool. So obviously I might be barking down the wrong tree here, but for example, with the company you mentioned, if for example they wanted to create their own token on top of Devve, would that be something that would be possible from their end, or would it be more they have to use the Devve token?
So the Devve token itself
Mm,
is the platform token for DevX. So DevX is the blockchain,
mm,
and the one and only token for the DevX blockchain is Devve.
mm,
Other companies in the future probably could create their own tokens on DevX. A little bit of that is making sure that we have our I's dotted and T's crossed from a legal and regulatory perspective. So we don't allow that yet, but
mm,
I think that's reasonable in the future. And then DevX again can be used for the exchange. Devve would be used as an intermediary token for the exchange because it's the main kind of platform token. And then the other thing to keep in mind with Devve is Devve has its own business model as well. It's being run by its own company. It has its own management, and it does truly have its own business model. So there's kind of three main areas of utility for Devve. One
mm,
is Devve can be staked by big companies who want to maintain verification nodes, or I'm sorry, verification nodes for
mm,
ESG data, so that the DevX blockchain can, like I was saying, one of our goals is to maintain the world's source of truth for ESG data. So using Devve to implement a system where you can keep this data in a way that's transparent and auditable is one of the utilities for Devve. A second utility of Devve is Devve sales then go into a perpetual fund where there's only one limited partner, which is the Forever Association,
mm,
and so investments like into the materials company I described, if that company takes off and creates a huge return on investment, all of the profits then get reinvested back into the fund. So it's a perpetual fund. So it's a cool
mm,
concept. It's the first
mm,
time I think I've ever seen. I don't know of anything else like this in the world that hopefully can just become massive, where you just get this investment vehicle that invests into environmental and social projects across the world. So it's fundamentally doing good,
mm,
where it can hopefully just grow and grow and grow, and all the profits continually be invested back in to do more of these environmental and social projects. I mean, it's a really compelling concept. And then the last area of utility for Devve is for use in payments, for example. So in the future, you have ESG assets tracked on the DevX blockchain. You have the marketplace that we've already built, and you can use Devve as the payment mechanism for it. And again, you're talking about a category that has tens of trillions of dollars in assets under management. Imagine a payment system, of that scale. So there's no guarantees, of course, at this early stage what or when or how that's all going to evolve. But that's the goal, is to have it be a payment mechanism for a category, that big. And then you start looking at other things that we grow and expand, like the exchange. That's not utility that's described in the original white paper, but using Devve to exchange between any other digital asset. The way Ray describes that is it becomes the money for money, right? And so over time there's going to be more and more utility for Devve as well. So that's kind of the design of the cryptocurrency, and where how it lies with respect to the blockchain. So.
How does this link to Devio Inc?
Yeah, so I'm the CEO of Devio. So again, the token was separated to be managed by the Forever Association, which is a Swiss entity. Devio is the company that makes the blockchain. So I'm the founder and CEO of Devio. Devio owns and creates the DevX blockchain. We're continuing to find more applications for it. Anybody that starts to build on the DevX blockchain is going to work with Devio. And then the Forever Association manages the Devve token itself, including the business model that I described in the three areas of utility. And so the Forever Association manages investments from the fund. It's being run by Ray Quintana, who's a really impressive fellow. He's was one of 2 general partners at the best performing early stage venture capital company in the country in the US, according to Preqin. So really top notch fellow, the exact type of person, we all would want running, the fund. And he's also great at putting together business relationships with, global 2000 companies, that kind of thing. So the token and its business model is in great hands. And then I'll continue to build the technology underlying everything.
Nice. That sounds really good. Really good. Okay, so the next question was, where are you looking to take the project in the future? I want to add on to that a little bit. So obviously, it sounds like your layer one, right, is really, really good, and it could be used not just for environmental stuff, right? Where are you going in the future with that? Is it just going to be focused on energy, or is it going to be other stuff as well?
Yeah. So environmental and social applications is one of the big categories, as you say. Another of the big categories we're looking into is digital assets. And so we have what we call our digital financial ecosystem, and that's tied in with a gaming application and a metaverse. And so people can go in actually right now, if you go to litcraft.com, you can download the Litcraft and Experience game, and you can play 24 games. We've got a great card battler. It's got match 3, merge, types of gameplay, like most of the big genres, for casual types of games. It's got classics like solitaire and Sudoku. And then the overall game ecosystem is you play any of these games, and you take part in this community, and then you get tokens. And then the tokens you can craft into more and more complex things. And those more and more complex things can let you build more and more things and have more and more advantages in the games. You can actually even build businesses that are kind of analogous to real world businesses. And so over a period of even over a year, you can build your business up and get it to where it's creating more and more profit. And so building this whole big digital financial ecosystem, is a big category, and I think it's a massive application as well, tying in gaming and metaverse applications, and ultimately even bringing in real world applications that real world assets. Like we'll bring in ESG assets like plastic removal tokens, into the digital financial ecosystem. So that's another of the big categories. Another area that we're looking to develop soon is the decentralized exchange, the Dev exchange. And so that'll be a partnership between, we're expecting it'll be a partnership between Forever and Devio, and we'll use the Devve token as an intermediary for transacting with assets. So that's a big category and something I'm excited about. And then another kind of big area that we're looking forward to now is really now starting to get a lot of other projects and companies using the DevX blockchain. I think it's it's in a lot of ways been 7 years getting to this moment in time, and we just finished our big V5 release, which is the latest Litcraft and Experience game, but also was an overhaul of the core blockchain, the in, which is the database sitting on top, the DFE servers, just all of the various pieces that we've built, all of the glass block marketplace stuff, all of the DevX web app, like all of that was a pretty big overhaul, and it was the biggest update we've ever done, but it was also the fewest problems we've had in any of our updates, which kind of shows like how hardened we've made into everything, and how we've been getting it more and more productized. So we're at a point now where we're going to start our DevX S2 business, is what it's called. It's kind of like Amazon's AWS business, where you go and you rent Amazon servers to run your business. In our case, you come and you rent a shard, to run your business, and you can upgrade more and more shards. And so that's what I was saying. It's been like 7 years getting to this point in time where many different companies and entities and projects all can now start building on the DevX platform and have the high speed, high throughput, cost effectiveness, and ease of integration with the RESTful API.
Nice. So would it be like, for example, if let's say I just wanted to build something really quickly, and obviously not being a big entity or anything, and I might be able to build something quite cheaply, but then if I scale, then obviously I would need more shards or validators. So then you'll charge more basically on that perspective.
Right.
So you would grow when I grow, and that type of thing.
Yeah, and that's why it's like AWS's business. So if you're a small company, you can get on and even get kind of a free tier on AWS, right? And so you can start small. So we want to do the same type of thing where you start small, maybe get where your application is run on a shard that has, kind of a starter shard that has many different applications running on it. And then eventually you get to a point where you're growing and get your own shard, that type of thing. And so the Forever Association, is again building out the Devve ecosystem. They see the increase in using DevX shards for many different applications is important to what they're doing as well. So they just recently asked us, can we get a public testnet up and running? So I think in March, just a couple weeks out, we're gonna have our first. I mean, the mainnet's been running for years, but we're going to have, and we've had test nets and mainnets, so we have a traditional software development system, but we're going to have a public test net for the first time, in a few weeks, and then that'll let people start building on it, and again, people can just play around with it, see if it's a good fit for what they want to do, and then grow into mainnet shards as suits their project. So.
Nice. Sounds really good. So yeah, that's most of my questions actually. So have you got any last words before?
No, those were great questions. You did your homework ahead of time. That was great. So
No worries.
I think we've hit most everything. So that was great questions and great discussion.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much. So yeah, if I don't see you guys, obviously my whole saying on my channel is see you at the top, and I'm sure I'm going to see you guys at the top because absolutely great interview and really a great pleasure interviewing you. So
really nice to meet you as well, Aaron. Thank you for having me on your show. Appreciate it.
If you liked what you saw with this, then definitely give this channel a lovely little subscribe button right there. And yes, either the gold one or the red one, press that button and you can be around for many more interviews like this. Great in-depth reviews and obviously, yes, home to the cheat sheet. And if you liked it, press the like button. And yeah, let me know what you guys thought of in the comment section down below. I'd love to know your opinions about the coin. So, but if I don't see you, I'll see you at the top. Peace.